Hey everybody, welcome to the Conscious Love Show. Whether you are single, you are in a relationship, or you're healing a broken heart, this show is here to inspire you, to remind you how beautiful, lovable, and amazing you truly are, and to give you the practical tools and insights to navigate from wherever you are right now to the loving relationship that you so deeply want to have. My name is Shane Kohler. I'm a certified transformational coach and trainer with over a decade experience helping people release their trauma and open their hearts to love. I've delivered seminars all over the world, coached thousands of people through my online platforms and programs, and every week I'm coming straight to you with the hottest insights and the best teachers around, bringing you powerful resources and profound conversations to heal your relationship with love, dating, and yourself. I'm so grateful you're here, and if it's your first time, welcome. You can count on me to always show up for you with my very best and a commitment to learn and grow myself so I can serve you to my maximum ability. Thanks so much for tuning into the show. I've got some awesome things planned for you today. So without further ado, let's dive in. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Conscious Love Show podcast. Shane Kohler on with you today. Pleasure as always. Looking forward to diving back in with you. And today I want to have an important conversation, an important one, and perhaps a controversial one for some listeners. So I want to tee up front. Maybe there will be some trigger warnings here, but I want to talk about the truth about men today in 2025. And before I get into the meat and potatoes of all of this, I just want to name my intention here and some of the things that I'm seeing in the work that I do and with the audience that I have, and just some of the mass narratives that I see on social media and in just the lives of men and women. And there's such a misunderstanding gap. I want to start by saying that men misunderstand women and women misunderstand men. And it's so sad and it's so tragic. And I just want to start with that. Like it's so sad and it's so tragic because if we could really understand each other, there would be no resentment. There would be no hate. There would be none of this fear that we have in relationship with each other. And I think there's a narrative on the side of women that women have it so much harder than men. And what a lot of women don't realize, and I say this because I know my audience is mostly women, and so I'm going to record this podcast as though I'm speaking to mostly women. Although for all the men who listen to this as well, I want to say thank you for being here. And perhaps this episode will be validating for you. Perhaps this episode will give voice to some things that you feel but don't really know how to speak, or maybe have never given permission to say. Because on the side of the women, which I understand because I work with a lot of women and I really, really get that side of it. It feels like men have it so much easier and women have it so much harder. But what a lot of ladies aren't aware of is that if you look at the side of men and you tune into the narratives that men are living in, men feel like they have it so much harder and women have it so much easier. And what I want to say about this is that not one side has it harder or another side has it easier. But look, at least when it comes to dating, love, and relationships, I'm not necessarily talking about workplace dynamics or like there's a lot of nuance and a lot to cover in this topic, but I'm going to stick specifically to the idea of dating and creating romantic and hopefully conscious loving connection. And when it comes to that journey, I just want to say it very clearly at the beginning here. It is hard to be a man and it is hard to be a woman in that journey. It's hard to be a human in that journey. And what I hope to do today for many of the women who are listening to this is give you some insight and give you some perspective into what it's like to be a man on this journey. And when I do this, I want to say this up front, that my intention is not to excuse any harm that's been caused to you, excuse any kind of mistreatment or wrongdoing. So let me say this up front. To the ladies who are listening today, I know that you have been hurt by men. And I know that many of the things that you have experienced and that have been done to you in your relationships with men, everything from blatant disregard to straight up abuse, I know that it's painful. I know so much of it is inexcusable. I want to be the first to go on record and say that so much of it should have never happened in the first place, and it's not right and it's not okay. But now I also want to speak to the other side of the coin, because I want to say that I could make that same statement to men. And I know a lot of ladies are really confused by that, right? Like, how could you say that men have been hurt by us the same way that we've hurt them? And maybe it's important to say that I'm not necessarily saying that it's the same way. But I will say that it's equally painful. The ways are different. Men are different than women. Men have different powers than women have. Women have different powers than men have. But what I want to name here is that the emotional landscape and the emotional dynamic, that, like, the emotional water that we're swimming in, is that men feel disempowered in relationship with women, and women feel disempowered in relationship with men. And it's actually that mutual sense of disempowerment that causes us to act out and hurt each other. And women have very distinct ways of hurting men, and men have very distinct ways of hurting women. I remember a comedian I was listening to one time, and I found it hilarious, but also true. And he wasn't talking about men and women. He was actually talking about little boys and little girls. And he was talking about having sons and daughters. But I think the dynamic that he was describing still makes perfect sense here. And so what he said was, like, if you have boys, boys will fuck your shit up. But if you have girls, girls will destroy your mind. Girls can make you feel like you're about 2 inches tall. So I think that dynamic, and I'm going to give some examples as we talk today, but I think what's being described by that comedian is very similar to what I'm going to talk about today, where, yes, men have very blatant, obvious ways of causing pain. Women have more subtle, insidious ways of causing pain. Where a man might blow a woman off or ghost her or reject her, which women do that too, by the way. But where a man might cheat, or, like, I'm thinking of some of these common male ways that we think that men hurt women. And that's real. I'm not justifying that. I'm not excusing that. But I'm saying, similar to what the comedian said, like, men will fuck your shit up. You know, men have very blatant, obvious ways of causing pain. Women have subtle, insidious ways of causing pain. But they know how to do it, and they sometimes do it without even realizing they're doing it. They have ways of tearing a man down, making him feel tiny, making him feel insignificant. They have ways of emasculating him. I remember my wife was at dinner with some friends a while back, and she shares the story a lot. This is a great example of one of the things I'm talking about. She shares the story a lot of, she was at dinner with some friends, and there was her and her previous husband at the time, and then a couple of friends. They were a married couple. And the man had said something just, casually in conversation, like, "I make good decisions, don't I?" And his wife said, "Yeah, like your business decisions." And you could just see on his face, like, just this, like, fallen look of how deeply that hurt him, of being publicly disrespected by his wife in front of company. And he had recently gone through some challenges in his businesses, and I don't know all the details. But she was publicly emasculating him in front of friends. And again, when I give this example, I'm not giving this example to say, well, everything men do is great and everything women does is, not great. That's not my point at all. What I really want the ladies who are listening to this to take away from it is if you can understand the relational water that men are swimming in when you meet them, that'll give you power. And I'm not saying that you should just, accept everything a man does because men are struggling so much that you should give them a pass. Like, I don't mean it like that. You should still have your standards. You should still have your boundaries. You should still ask for what you want. You should still walk away from situations that aren't okay. Like, all of that stands. But maybe there's a level at which we could soften resistance a little bit. And if you can soften that resistance a little bit, maybe there's room to bridge understanding where you would normally shut down. I was on a coaching call with a client of mine recently, and there was a man that she had been dating. They'd been on a couple of dates and they had slept together, and it was very early stages of a relationship. And she felt like he was being distant and that he wasn't giving her enough attention. And she felt like, this person slept with me and now they're being kind of distant and cold. And he had reached out to say, hey, how was your weekend, or something like that. And she was saying to me on the call, she's like, I think I'm just going to ghost him. I think I'm just going to ghost him because, he's not showing up the way I expect him to. And I said, well, you could ghost him or you could talk to him about it. And I encouraged her right there on the call to text him, and I gave some suggestions about what she could say because she had left him on red for 2 days, hadn't responded to his message. And she did. She took the advice and she replied to him right away. And then he responded immediately to her message. And then she said something to the effect of, I don't remember all the details, but it was something to the effect of, maybe we have different expectations about communication and things like that. And I think we should talk about that and get on the same page. And I want to admit, he got a little bit defensive. He said, well, we knew that we were both going to be on trips, and he defended himself for a moment. And that triggered her. And she's like, see, I'm trying to be vulnerable and now he's being defensive. And I said, well, I can understand why he's being defensive because he feels called out. So maybe just reaffirm, and this is all through text message and things get lost in translation over text message. And I said, maybe just reaffirm to him that you're not mad at him. There's no problem here, but this is just something that you think is worth discussing so the two of you can both feel good about it. And so she did send that message. And then he said, you're right, that would be a good idea. And he's like, do you want to talk tonight? And I'm using that example because I want to show just how quickly a mutual misunderstanding that was on the verge of ghosting and defensiveness and argument, by being willing to just extend that olive branch of understanding, completely shifted the context of the whole interaction. And those are the kinds of practices that I'm getting at here. It's not to excuse everything. It's not to say everything a man does is wonderful. Believe me, I know better than most that everything a man does is not wonderful. But I also know a lot of what men do is misperceived by women. And this is a great example of that because she was misperceiving or misunderstanding his actions, his intentions. She was getting ready to ghost him because of how dissatisfied she was with all of it. But just a little bit of being willing to extend that understanding shifted the whole context of their relationship. And those are the kinds of things that we need to practice with each other more. I think it's worth noting too that when they got a little further into the discussion, he brought up to her, I haven't been reaching out as often because when we first started talking, you told me you don't like to talk that much. And I've been trying to respect that. And she was like, oh shit, I did say that. She's like, but I didn't mean it like that, or that's not what I meant. And I get where she was coming from when she said that, and it's valid that she said that. But he misunderstood what she meant. And now they're operating from two polar realities, not bridging the gap in between, misunderstanding the intentions and the energy. And that could have led to a relationship collapsing that might have otherwise succeeded. And I see this so much in my work, and I say this often, you've probably heard me say this if you listen to the podcast regularly, is that if we could get better at bridging these communication gaps with each other, a lot more relationships would take off. You see, she wasn't responding to him, his actions, the relationship that they had, and this is important. She was responding to her own stories, her own narratives, her own history, and so was he. When she said, I don't want to talk that often, you've got to understand, and this is some of the things I want to touch on today to be able to understand how the masculine would hear something like that. Because for a man to be over interested in a woman, well, now he's a simp. Now he's pathetic. Now he's lame. And here's a man who has probably been rejected just as much as she has. Maybe at times in his past, he's been over interested. He's been too engaged. He's shown too much effort. And that made him less desirable to a woman. Maybe she thought, well, he doesn't have enough options, or why is he so interested in me? He must not be that worthy or that high value. And this is the water that men are swimming in. You've got to be strong. You've got to be stoic. You've got to be emotionless. You've got to feel like nothing gets to you. You can't let a woman get under your skin. If you do, that makes you weak as a man. And in circles of men, and I think I'm uniquely positioned to speak to this because I see both sides so clearly. I was raised as a man or a boy in a culture of men. I got all the conditional programming that young boys and young men get in our society. I lived that. I grew up that way. I was that guy for a lot of years. And then I learned about the other side of the equation. I got married. I learned to understand my wife. I have a daughter now. That's going to be a whole new level of understanding. I've worked with thousands of women at this point through various programs and one-on-one coaching and group coaching and so many different platforms that I've worked with so many different women. And so I don't want to pretend like I understand everything, but I think I have a pretty good handle on what women are dealing with. And because I see both sides of this so clearly, I can also see where the misunderstanding happens clearly. And so let's talk about a few cultural differences between men and women. And I want to maybe break some myths down here. There is a cultural pressure for men to be strong, emotionless, stoic, to not let anything get to them. to carry the weight of all of it. And like, I'll share this too. Like, I see this even right now with what my wife and I are going through with, we just had a new baby. She's 3 weeks old. And I want to be sensitive when I say this because, like, let me be the first to acknowledge my wife is going through so much right now. She's feeding the baby. She's up for hours at night, and I am too, but maybe not quite as much as her. And she's going through hormonal changes and shifts in her body, and she's feeling so much. And like my wife, she's just going through a lot right now, which if you've had a baby, then you probably know what that's like. And I'm in the position of having to kind of hold the structure for the whole family right now. And I want to say, I'm glad to do that. I love my wife. I love my daughter. I love our dogs. I'm happy to do that. But my entire life right now is literally about taking care of my wife, taking care of my daughter, taking care of my dogs. I'm doing everything almost in the household that like my wife used to do, but now she doesn't do much of it. She does some of it still, and she's amazing. Like, I'm not saying anything negative. My wife is amazing. She's an amazing mother. She's doing amazing with our daughter. But so much of what she used to do, she's completely consumed by the baby. So now I'm doing all of that and taking care of her and stepping in to take care of the baby and taking care of the dogs. And I do this gladly. I love my family. I'll do it as long as I need to. But what I want to address here, and some people will probably get mad at me for addressing this, but this is just real, so I'm going to name it, is that what everyone tells me is like, your wife needs your support right now. She's going through so much. I agree. I see it. I'm here for it. But nobody's asking how I'm doing, how I'm processing being a new father, how I'm handling taking on all of these new responsibilities, how I'm stepping into this level. Like, nobody's interested in that. And I don't need them to be. Like, look, I have a therapist I can call if I need to process something. I have friends. I have support in my life. If I need support, I can reach out. But the reason I'm giving this example, I'm not saying anything negative about my wife or my daughter or fatherhood or any of that. I love it. I'm here for it. It's amazing. But what I'm pointing to is the way the culture focuses on women's challenges versus men's challenges. There's an expectation that a man is supposed to be strong. He's supposed to have it all together. He's supposed to be emotionally resilient. And there's a permissiveness for women to be emotional, to fall apart, to need support. Now, I want to be the first to say that I know sometimes I need support. I have channels to get it when I need it. I ask for it. So I'm not like one of these martyr men who just holds it all together until they have a mental breakdown. I've been there. I've learned that about myself. But I'm just seeing the cultural reactions even in my current reality. And if we blow this up at scale, in a world where men from a young age are taught to be strong, to be emotionless, to not have needs, to hold it all together, to be stoic, while women are expected to, like, it's actually, to be everything I just said is the sign of a strong man in our culture. That's the sign of a good man, a solid man in our culture. And women are almost encouraged to be the opposite. We want women to be soft. We want them to be emotionally available. We want them to be warm. We want them to be connected. We want we invite that in women. Now, I understand not all women are that way, and I'm not making any kind of judgment. I'm just talking about the cultural expectations that we live under and then how that plays out, because this is programming that we receive from the time that we're so young. I mean, watch a Disney movie, right? It's the strong Prince Charming saving the damsel in distress. And I know that women are not damsels in distress. You ladies are fierce and strong and powerful. I get it. But women have a certain permissiveness to be emotionally available, to be open-hearted, to be connected, to need relationship in a way that men are not given permission to. And I think something I've observed is it's really difficult for women to understand how deeply that goes in men. And women want men to be more emotionally available. But there's a very fine line there, because the moment a man becomes too emotional, he gets rejected by women. They don't feel safe with him anymore. Because a woman feels safest to be emotional, to be needy, to fall apart when a man is holding a solid, strong space for that. If he goes too far into that soft feminine energy, now she feels like she needs to hold the masculine space. And many women do, right? Like there are a lot of relationships like that. But then she feels like she can't be safe to be emotional because she's always trying to hold it together for him. And I'm not suggesting there's an easy answer to this. I'm not suggesting there's a right or wrong. I'm just addressing the complexity of the situation. I hope that you can hear that. There's no judgment. There's no shame on either side. There's complexity. There's intricacy. This is what I know about men. Men want to be romantic. Men want to be in love. Men want to be emotionally available. Men want to be connected in all of those things. And most men are carrying some kind of wound where they've learned that when I let that part of myself out, I get hurt. I saw a video online recently I thought was really, really revealing. And there's this young guy, handsome guy. He was probably in his early 20s or something like that. But just, like kind of innocent, good looking guy. And he had his phone out and he's like, I'm just going to go for it. I'm just going to take my shot. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So I'm just going to go for it. And he was trying to talk to women. Right. And this was like downtown. There were like people outside of a club and stuff. And so he walks up to this group of women and he says, "Excuse me, can I talk to you for a minute?" And he says, "Look, I'm sorry if I'm interrupting your night or being, if you're going to be offended by this, but I need to be honest. Like, I think you're really attractive. I'd really like to get to know you. And I wanted to say something. I feel like I would beat myself up if I didn't take a chance here." Like, really polite, really sincere, really genuine. Like, I mean, like, you got to admire the guy. He took a huge risk. He put himself out there. He was sincere. He was genuine. He was respectful. And this woman turns around and she goes, "What? You're not gay?" And he's like, what? And she's like, "I thought you were gay." And he's like, "No, I'm not gay." And then she starts laughing at him and mocking him with her friends right there. And she's like, "Oh my God, I thought you were gay." And she's just like straight up mocking this guy who's like, he's out on a limb. He's taking a chance. He's being vulnerable. Now, I know for a lot of the ladies who are listening, you say, "Oh, I would never do that." And I believe you, right? Like, I'm not suggesting that you're the ones out there doing that. But I want to say, this happens a lot when men put themselves out there. This happens a lot. It might not be my listeners who do it, but there are a lot of women doing stuff like this. And I think this resentment is so deep, and it goes back so far, because I've already said it, but I'm going to say it again. Women have hurt men and men have hurt women, and this has been going on for a long time. And there's this deep-seated resentment on both sides. And it's passed down from our parents, and we grow up listening to our mom, never trust a man, or listening to our father, women are all blah, blah, blah. And we grow up with this, we see it in the movies, and it's in the music, and then we see it in middle school and high school and all the drama and chaos. And like, this is what we inherit. And then here we are adults, and this is what we've been taught. And there's deep resentment on both sides. And I'm going to tell you, there's probably not a single person 25, 30 years old and above that hasn't been deeply hurt by the opposite sex at some point in their life. Probably not a single person. And men live with this expectation that they're supposed to be the ones carrying the burden of initiation. It's funny, I talk to so many women and I'm like, say hi to a guy. Strike up a conversation with him. Give him your phone number. Tell him to call you. They say, oh my God, I would never do that. If he wants to talk to me, then he needs to be man enough to say something to me. And I'm like, I hear that. That's valid. Like, I'm not going to say that's not valid. Like, I think there's something to be said for men being bold and courageous and being able to initiate. But let me flip the coin for a minute. For the ladies listening, imagine if there was the societal expectation that you were carrying the burden of initiating 100% of the time. The burden of subjecting yourself to rejection was on you 100% of the time. That you were just expected to put yourself out there endlessly, no matter who mocks you, no matter who publicly shames you, no matter who accuses you of being a sleaze or a creeper or a rapist, that you were just expected to keep doing it. What would that feel like? And I'm not saying that men shouldn't do that. I'm just saying it's hard. Take this from a man who did it a lot when I was single. It's hard. And I think there was a time in history before feminism, which is largely a good thing. So I'm not knocking feminism. I think it needed to happen. Women needed to become more empowered, and it was necessary. Are there some toxic aspects to it? Sure. But it was necessary. It needed to happen. But historically speaking, before feminism, I think women tended to appreciate when a man would take that risk, when he would put himself out there. Now there's a whole different dynamic to it. When a man approaches a woman, there's maybe a 5% chance it's going to go well. Maybe a 30% chance he's going to be publicly ridiculed. Maybe a 20% chance he's going to be accused of being a sleaze or a creep. You know, post the Me Too movement, and that was necessary, right? Like, these abuses by men needed to be exposed. It was a good movement. It needed to happen. Not knocking the movement. But I think a lot of women don't realize what it's like for a man who's not an abuser, who's not a rapist, to be living in the social dynamic, the romantic dynamic post Me Too. where men are constantly painted as that, where a man's sexual desire, which is a natural part of his masculinity, and any woman in a relationship with him wants it to be there. But outside of a relationship, his sexual desire is considered a threat. It's considered dangerous. And women have a whole world of sexual shame to deal with. I'm not denying that. But I'm pointing to the reality that men have a world of sexual shame that they're dealing with too. And where women have had the opportunity to speak out about their sexual shame, right? I'm not going to be slut shamed. I'm not going to be criticized for my sexual choices. And women have been given a platform to express those sentiments. I'm not saying it's completely resolved. We still got a long way to go with that too. But consider that men have not even been given the platform to express their sexual shame. Their sexual shame is still considered too much of a threat by the culture for us to have a space where men can openly talk about it. And again, I'm not justifying any kind of abuse, any kind of toxic behavior. I'm not justifying anything here. But I'm just inviting the ladies to consider for a moment. What's it like for a man who wants to approach a woman in an authentic way? Who, yes, has a sexual interest in her. Who also maybe has an interest in getting to know her as a person. He's not a creep. He's not any of this. He's just a guy who wants to connect with a woman in all the ways that men love to connect with women. And he's carrying the entire burden of the social judgment that we have against men. That's a tough position to be in. I'm not surprised that men don't approach women anymore. And women complain about that. I hear it all the time. Why won't men approach me? Why I'm out there, I'm making eye contact. Why don't men approach me? Men are terrified to approach women. Because there's a 5% chance it's going to go well. And a much larger chance they're going to experience anything from public shame to literally being accused of being a rapist or something like that. And so men are terrified. And yes, men resent women for all of this. And women resent men for all the things that have been done to them. And I'm going to say we could make a case on both sides that the resentment is valid, right? We could sit here and list all the harms that men have caused to women. And we could say those are valid. The resentment is justified. And we could do the same thing to men. But where does that get us? More hate, more anger, more victimhood. No healing. And so if we want to establish and forge conscious connections, something we've got to do is be willing to forgive. Be willing to assume that when you see a man or a woman out in the world, she's not the toxic person you saw on social media, not the abuser of your past. They're just a human being with the desires that all human beings have, trying to make their way in the world, trying to find love, trying to find connection, trying to feel significant, trying to get through the day. We've got to be willing to forgive enough to not see other people through the lens of our own wounding. and see them as just another human being, another traveler on the path. And yeah, there are different social dynamics and things like that, but underneath all of that, maybe they're not that different from you. Maybe at the core, they want the same things you want. And maybe they're just as confused about how to get it as you are. And maybe when they go for it, it's going to come off awkward, or it's going to come off a little weird, or it's not going to land the right way. And you might get even a little offended by that. But that's where we've got to take a breath. Be like, man, this is fucking hard for everybody. This is hard for everybody. I want to add another level to this conversation, because historically men had a secure place in women's life. And again, this is pre-feminism, right? Which is a good thing. I absolutely love it that women can make their own money and have their own jobs and their own careers and their own significance in the world. Like I think it is one of the best things that has ever happened. It has elevated the world in so many ways. But it's also important to address that when half of the population significantly changes their social place, that has huge repercussions. And so let's look at this for a moment, because prior to the feminist movement, men had secure places in women's life as protectors and providers. They worked, they paid the bills, and that secured their place in a woman's life. She needed men for that. And men needed women to raise children, to clean the house, to cook meals, things like that. And this wasn't particularly healthy. Right? There was a lot of abuse and toxicity that underneath the perfect 1950s American family was a dark shadow that nobody was talking about, right? So the changes that have happened needed to happen. They're good for everyone. They're healthy for everyone. But that doesn't mean they don't have social repercussions, because now women make their own money. They have their own careers. They pay for their own houses. Women don't even need men to make babies anymore. And I love that for women. Like a lot of women will ask me, like, should I try to find a man who will pay my bills and take care of me? And I'll be like, no. And here's the reason, is because being in that position with a man disempowers you. You need to have your own money. You need to be in charge of your own reality. Because if this guy ends up being abusive, you need to have an exit. You need to be in control of your own life. That is a good and necessary thing for a woman's safety. And I firmly stand by that. Now, if you end up in a committed partnership with someone, you're merging your lives, you're building a family, and you decide one person's going to go to work, one person's going to stay home because that supports what we're doing here, that's a different story. But I think it's important for a woman's safety that she's not completely dependent on a man. But I also want to acknowledge that because that's the new reality, because women don't need men in the same way that they used to, men don't know where they belong in a woman's life. And women have become so empowered, so educated, such bosses in their life, which is beautiful. But women have become so self-sufficient that a lot of men just feel like, I don't even know what I could offer her. And I'm going to tell you, for all the men listening, I'm going to tell you what you have to offer a woman in today's world, because the strongest relational currency that men can offer in today's world is emotional intelligence. Right? Women don't need men to pay their bills anymore. Women don't need men to, stand outside with a spear and protect them from like warring tribes. Like, that's not our reality anymore. What women need from men, the number one relational currency that men can bring to a relationship is emotional intelligence. And like, I'll say this, like when I met my wife, that's something I had developed in myself. I was a coach. I was a trainer. I was working with groups of people. I had become quite emotionally attuned and quite emotionally intelligent. And at the time, my wife made more money than me. She had her life together. She had her own home and all of that. And that was how I earned my place in the relationship, was not through what I could physically provide in terms of finances and resources and things like that. It was through what I could emotionally provide. And the modern man who is a protector and provider, yes, in certain dynamics, he may be a financial provider. He may be a strong protector of the home. I'm not saying that's completely irrelevant. But I'm saying the modern protector and provider is one who can provide emotional attunement, emotional stability, protect a woman's emotions, create a safe space for her to be all of herself, where she can cry and she can scream and she can break down and she can fall apart. And he can protect her in that. He can hold that space for her. He can provide that security. But I want to name the rub here, because that is what men are evolving into. As women are evolving into their new roles in society, men are also evolving into a greater role in society as emotional protectors and emotional providers. But here's the rub. What men are being called into is something that they have actively been encouraged to not be their entire life. You know, if we had like a reverse feminist movement, like the same way that women were encouraged to make their own money, get their own jobs, assert their independence, be their own people in the world. If we could have the same movement for men that would encourage men to become emotionally attuned, emotionally available, to soften, like to give men that permissiveness, that would be a huge upgrade for our world. And I want to say that is happening. But it's happening slowly. And so what we have, like, we have a masculinity crisis in today's world. We have men who don't know their place. They're not needed in the way that they used to be needed. They are societally shamed and blamed as basically every problem that exists. And like, let's be real. Men caused most of the problems. Like, who destroyed the environment? Men. You know, who created our toxic economy? Men. Right? Like, but I think we need to say more accurately, because it's not the man that you meet out at the coffee shop who did all that. It's the patriarchal systems. Yes, it's the ultra wealthy 1% men who've kind of pulled the strings on the world throughout history. The patriarchal systems that have run the globe have done this, but it's not the man that you're going to meet when you're out at your friend's house. Like, he didn't do it, right? But he was brought up in a patriarchal system that had a certain version of what a man was supposed to be, and he internalized that version. And even though he's probably a good guy with a good heart and he's trying to do his best, he probably carries some of that too. And this is the masculinity crisis. Is our world needs something from men today that men have never been taught to give. And women are out there saying, why aren't men as evolved as us? Why aren't men doing the work like we are? And I'm going to say this, and this might trigger some people, but it's really true. Women have been encouraged to work on themselves. Women have been encouraged to go to therapy. If a man goes to therapy, he's socially ridiculed. Maybe not as much today. It's becoming more regular. But women have been encouraged to do that for years. Women have been encouraged to create bonds and friendships and community and to be emotionally attuned in a way that fosters those kinds of connections. Men have been taught the opposite. If you need something, you're weak. If you have emotions, you're weak. And so, why are women so far ahead of men in some of these domains? We could say in the emotional domain, in the spiritual domain, in the personal development domain, in the relational domain. Why are women so far ahead of men in these domains? Well, the reason is because women have been programmed and encouraged to value those things. Men have been programmed and encouraged to value other things. You know, if you look at who's further ahead in the bodybuilding domain, it's men. Yes, there are female bodybuilders, but it's much more a man's game than it is a woman's game. That fits in the cultural masculine value system. So what I'm getting at here, I know that I'm talking about a lot of problems and not offering a lot of solutions. Because I want to offer some solutions, but here's what I want to say. There's nothing anybody can do to solve these problems on a global level. Right? Like, we have to trust that humanity is evolving the same way that women have evolved out of their traditional roles. We can trust that the same is going to happen for men. But there's nothing we can do to fix that overnight. But here's what we can do on the individual level. We can start to understand the water that we're swimming in. I would recommend, for anyone who is resonating with this conversation, there's a woman named Alison Armstrong. And she has made it her life's work to study men. And she's written profound books about understanding men, understanding women. Her work was something that changed my life forever when I really understood her work on understanding women. But she has personally wanted to understand men. And I think it's so beautiful. She's someone who, like all of us, have been hurt. And rather than letting that create resentment, rather than letting that breed hate, she said, I want to really understand, right? It's like the prayer of Saint Francis. He says, let me seek to understand rather than seek to be understood. That's a healed perspective. And I'm going to say this to the women, and when I say this to you ladies, please understand that I encourage this for the men as well. But I'm going to say it to the women because I know most of my audience is women. And why is most of my audience women? Because I have a relationship podcast. And who has been encouraged to take a sincere interest in relationships? Women. But men are not, let me just reiterate this, right? Men are not wrong for not taking a serious interest in relationships. Men have been culturally conditioned to believe that doing that makes them weak. Women have been culturally conditioned to believe that doing that makes them a good woman. So women are rewarded for doing it, men are punished for doing it. That doesn't make men bad. That doesn't make them all toxic guys who have no interest in healing. It requires a lot of courage to break out of a societal mold. And I want to say a lot of men are doing it. I know to the ladies, and I talk to women all the time, I know it may not always seem like that, but it's true. A lot of men are doing it. And I'd like to invite you to trust that as well. But anyway, this is what I want to say to the ladies. And men, if you're listening, I encourage the same for you. Try to understand what it's like to be a man. When you want a man to come approach you and you say, if he was a real man, he would come approach me. I want you to really take a moment and think about everything he's facing when he comes to approach you. Think about what it feels like to carry the expectation that he should be the one to approach, with all the social judgment and ridicule and things that men have had to face when they do approach. Try to understand what's happening on the other side of the coin. It's hard. And ladies, I know it's hard for you too. I'm not saying it isn't. I'm saying it is hard to be a human being. We have inherited generations of pain being shared back and forth between men and women. And we're like on the spearhead of like this lineage that has passed this down for eons. And we have the opportunity to change it. And I really think that's what we're doing in this age, but it's messy. But just like that example I shared earlier of the woman that I was coaching and she wanted to ghost the guy, but then I encouraged her, just take a moment to try to understand. Take a moment to invite connection rather than severing it. And then when she did that, the doors that opened as a result. I could encourage the ladies out there, when you see a man and you're like, well, I wish he'd come talk to me. Maybe you could find it in yourself to just introduce yourself and say, hey, how's your day going? To just open that door, to let him know that it's safe to talk to you. To let him know that if he wants to talk, you're not going to ridicule him. You're not going to shame him. You're not going to judge him as dangerous. And maybe for a moment, you could just assume that risk of rejection that he is so often expected to assume. Maybe if there's a man in your life who's not as emotionally available as you would like him to be, instead of judging that, which, I mean, that's just, when a man is judged by a woman, it just hurts so much, right? Like, this would be a whole other topic, but I don't think women realize how much men crave a woman's approval. It's like primal. It's so fundamental. Like, yeah, it's hard to really even explain it. And when he's dating or when he's in a relationship with a woman, all he wants is to feel appreciated and respected. All he wants is to feel like he's her hero. And today, it's really hard for a woman to let a man be her hero. For understandable reasons, but then men end up hating women because they feel like no matter what they do, they never get to be the hero. And this is so deep. It runs so deep on both sides. But if you can just try to see through the illusion for a moment. If in every man you meet, you could just peek behind the curtain and see that inside of him there's a little boy who just wants to be good enough. He wants to be loved. He wants to be approved of. He wants to matter. And this doesn't mean that you excuse things. It doesn't mean that you accept poor treatment. It doesn't mean that you don't have standards, that you don't have boundaries. But as you really lean into understanding and attuning to the experience of the other, you might begin to see some things in your own way of operating that were limiting connection. You might begin to see some ways in which your isolated view of reality was severing the opportunity you had to find common ground with a human being. And I'm going to go back to something I said early on in this episode. If more people could get good at finding that common ground, we would have so many more successful relationships than we currently do. I want you to think about that for a moment. There's something like, I read a statistic a while back, this may not still be accurate, but it was something like 70 to 80% of new dating connections never become a relationship, right? So two people who go out on a date, make a connection, have an interest in each other. 70 to 80% of those will never actually become a relationship. And I'd say maybe 10, 20% of those were just maybe not compatible. But that other 60%, those are the people who could have connected, who could have built something together if they had been able to find a common ground of understanding. And I want to say this for the ladies. Most men, I know you're probably not going to see this on social media. You're probably not going to see this on sensationalized television or media of any form because our world feeds on fear and chaos and drama. But most men are good guys with simple needs. And if they feel like they matter, they feel like they can be someone's hero, they feel important, they feel like they have a place where they belong and someone who's going to be appreciated and that place is safe for them, they'll commit. Because most men, that's what they want. I know this isn't the Andrew Tate version of reality. And unfortunately, the resentment between men and women has become so strong that people like Andrew Tate have a platform because he has given a voice to masses of men who feel like they have no place, who feel like they have no purpose. And he's given them something to align behind that makes them feel strong. But that's not who men are. Even the men who take on that kind of persona, they're just deeply wounded men who feel like they have no other way to be significant. And yes, ladies, those are the kind of men that you need to protect yourself against. Those are the kind of men that you need to walk away from. It's not your job to fix their wounding. But maybe, just maybe, even as you walk away from them, instead of seeing them as the misogynistic asshole that it's easy to paint them out to be, maybe you could just recognize the scared little boy who feels unworthy of love and has found a way to overcompensate for it. While you put your boundaries and block him from your phone and do all of that because you need to protect yourself. But even that shift in perspective could make you more available to the kind of connection that you want to experience with men. And I want to say, there are so many men out there who want that. So again, to the ladies, thank you for listening to this today. Thank you for being willing to open your hearts to a conversation like this and make it an hour into this episode. If you're a woman and you're listening to this right now, that says a lot about you. Your wisdom, your compassion, your depth, your ability to hold nuance. And if you're a man listening to this, I hope you feel seen. I hope you feel validated. I hope you know that you're not alone in these struggles. And I hope you also know that however you may have felt slighted by women, however you may have felt that you've been given an unfair chance with women, that underneath that, she's hurting just as much as you are. And what we really have underneath it all are two wounded little children with big adult egos that have become so overprotective that they can't find their way to each other anymore. And that's where the healing needs to happen. So thank you to all of you for listening today. Much love and appreciation for you being here. Last thing I want to say, next week we are beginning our 7-day Conscious Love Challenge. You may have heard me mention this on the podcast before, but if you'd like to join me for the upcoming challenge, I'd love to have you there. It's going to be an opportunity for us to work closely together for 7 days. I guide you through my the core of my work. So the thing I do in my bigger programs and my process, I take you through the core of it over 7 days. We work on the essential healing practices that make us available to conscious love. So if you've enjoyed this podcast today, you're going to love the challenge. Early enrollment is open now, so make sure to click the link in the show notes wherever you're listening to this and sign up with early enrollment. Aside from that, thank you so much for being here today. Love and blessings to all of you. I'll see you back here next week. Hope you're having a great one. Take care. Bye. Thanks again for checking out the show. Please subscribe on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on the most. And I would love it so much if you leave a review and tell people what you think of us. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram @TheLivingRelationship to connect more closely. And I'm grateful to be supporting you on your journey to love.